We'll have plenty of time to discuss these interesting topics. It will be divided in two parts. So the first part, we're going to talk about the knowledge for ecosystem protection in the high seas in the context of global changes. And so we'll have a couple of presentations on different high seas ecosystems. And in the second part, we're going to have a roundtable with panelists to go more into the tools that can support decision-making for the protection of this ecosystem in the high seas. So so we'll go through a number of projects, mostly funded by the French Global Environment Facility, the FFEM. And I will ask Yannick Etienne to give you a word of introduction first. So Yannick, merci.
Okay, thank you very much, Aurélie. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to all participants. So my name is Yannick Etienne. I'm in charge of marine and coastal ecosystems for the French Facility for Global Environment. I'm delighted to be with you today to introduce this session with my partners from the OFB, l'Office français de la biodiversité, and IUCN. FFEM has been involved for more than 25 years in supporting projects aimed at preserving marine and coastal ecosystems and sustainable development of the territories, and since 2014 in supporting BBNG process. The management of activities and the protection of biodiversity in the high seas are complicated by lack of knowledge and an imperfect governance framework that doesn't favor the protection of marine environments and organisms, and the conservation of goods and services provided by those ecosystems. The international community has recognized the need to improve this framework by supplementing the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea with a new instrument in construction, the BBNG Agreement. In this context, high seas projects submitted to FFEM try to make significant contributions to the building of high seas governance and to the implementation of this new agreement, in particular by providing scientific knowledge on the ecosystems to be preserved. Since 2014, FFEM and our partners have thus supported projects concerning emblematic ecosystems with the acquisition of new scientific knowledge on the functioning of those particular ecosystems and communicating their importance and vulnerability, taking in account that they are increasingly exposed to anthropogenic risks due to the availability of sophisticated techniques to reach and exploit them. This session is organized in two parts. In the first part, scientists will explain why it's necessary today to preserve those emblematic marine ecosystems. The second part will be organized in a form of a roundtable discussion on the modes of governance planned or existing the management tools available. Some projects will be presented as examples that I would like to introduce very quickly. First, the projects with IUCN, conservation and sustainable use of seamounts in the Southwest Indian beyond areas of national jurisdiction. These projects aim to improve the state of knowledge on deep sea marine ecosystems in high sea, and also propose concrete measures for the conservation and management of deep sea marine ecosystems. Second, initiated in 2016, the project Oceanic Plankton Climate and Development with TARA, for the benefit of TARA Expedition Foundation, has enabled progress to be made in the recognition of the importance of preserving planktonic ecosystem, both for their role in carbon pump and also in fisheries management. Last but not least, the thermal dome and the Sargasso Sea are also two sites representative of the biodiversity and importance of the ecosystems of high sea, integrated in one project named Sargadome, which officially started last week. They are dynamic formations which move, shrink, and expand with currents and winds. They are mainly located beyond national jurisdiction on the high sea, but regularly or from time to time on zones located under the sovereignty of states. So, without further delay, I will leave the floor to Aurélie, and I wish you a good session.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Yannick, for this introduction about FFEM contribution in this very important topic of the high seas. So the first presenter is Frederick Menard, who I invite to join me on stage. So Frederick will talk to us about the seamount ecosystem in the southwest Indian Ocean and the project that Yannick mentioned, and with a very passionate expedition on the Walter Shoal, which is, Frederick will talk a lot about these seamounts right now. So thank you, Frederick.
Merci Aurélie, merci Yannick. You hear me? It's okay? Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to present this program. So the session addresses the kind of science to feed the policy decision in high sea, especially in very important for biodiversity conservation sites in high seas. And I will take the example of a recent program that investigated seamount ecosystem of the Southwest Indian Ocean beyond national jurisdiction. So just a few words. My name is Frederick Menard, and I am a scientist from a French public research institute, IRD. Okay, that's good. So I will try to address 3 questions. The first one is why seamounts are vulnerable ecosystems. The second one is what science tells us on seamounts' deep sea marine life. And the third one is how science can feed policy decision. So to do that, I will take the opportunity to present a program that finished a couple of years ago. And the case study is the Walters Shoals. So the Walters Shoal is located south of Madagascar. You can see this on the map. And it's an isolated and poorly known seamount. And during the program, we decided to organize a pluridisciplinary sea cruise in 2017 with scientists from different countries of Southwest Indian Ocean. And it was on board the research vessel Marion Dufresne. So a few words about the Walters Shoal. So the Walters Shoal has a summit area at around 25-50 meter depth. Walters Shoal is at the confluence of the subtropical and the subantarctic waters, and there is a complex circulation that enhances biological productivity from phytoplankton to large marine predators. And it's very far from Madagascar, so it's beyond national jurisdiction. So the threats that face the Walters Shoal is a significant zone very close to the surface and then accessible to fishing. And the goals of the program was to provide evidence-based knowledge for protecting this vulnerable ecosystem. So what science tells us about the seamounts deep sea marine life? So for that, we organize scuba diving sampling, and the aim was to investigate the benthos fauna and the ecological characteristics of the benthos fauna. For that, it was organized from the board during the cruise. So we collected a lot of samples that were analyzed later in the laboratory of the different partners. We also investigated the pelagic fauna using different gears. Here, for example, you have an example of a trawl that allowed us to collect micronecton samples to be able to describe the micronectonic fauna, and the micronecton is one of the forage fauna for the large predators, the large marine predators. We also investigated the distribution of the large marine predators around the seamounts, and we were so able to see a clear association between the abundance of the visitors, like fish predators, like marine mammals, like seabirds, and the distance to the seamount. It means that the closer the seamount, the more the abundance of these organisms. We also were able to register the occurrence of fish predators. 23 species were registered around the water shoals, including several species endangered on the IUCN red list categories. And for the seabirds, we also identified 20 species, including 8 regular residents that were classified as endangered species using the IUCN red list. To conclude, how science can feed policy decision. So with all the data we collected during this program, we evidence the needs for protecting the water shoal, because the biodiversity registered during the cruise and in the literature were clearly rich, and a significant number of species had an endangered conservation status. So we also conducted connectivity studies that showed that there were a high local retention of the species around the water shoals, and we also observed a high number of endemic species. So all this information were presented in different fora, policy brief, oral presentations, and this allowed us proposing water shoal as a benthic protected area designed by the regional fishery body SIOFA, which regulates some aspects of bottom fishing activities. So the question now is towards a fully protected water shoal area. This is an open question. Thank you very much, Aurélie.
Thank you very much, Frederick. Thank you for taking us in the Southwest Indian Ocean and this great ecosystem. So our next two presenters, it's still the middle of the night for them. So they recorded their presentation, and we will show you the videos. The first one is Jorge Jimenez from the Mar Viva Foundation. He will talk to you about the thermal dome, so on the off coast of Costa Rica. And so this is part of the Sargasso project that Yannick introduced a bit earlier to you. So make sure if you can play the video.
The ocean is full of mysteries and wonders. There are amazing phenomena among its depths. One of them is the thermal dome. Despite its great importance, the dome is largely unknown. The thermal dome is a unique oceanographic phenomenon in the American continent. The North Equatorial Countercurrent, located in deep waters, ascends when approaching the American continent, and this action causes a swirl. This swirl brings the deep waters, which are cold and rich in nutrients, to the surface. This spectacular phenomenon is called upwelling. The upwelling zone causes variations in water temperature at different depths, while creating an invisible bell or dome shape. This phenomenon can cover thousands of square kilometers, being found in high seas areas and within the economic zones of Central American countries. Due to its oceanographic characteristics and high concentrations of nutrients, the dome is an ecosystem with great diversity and abundance of species. The high concentration of nutrients in the area favors the growth of microalgae, which helps in carbon fixation as part of the photosynthesis process and dampens the effects of climate change. Besides, it is an important field for the feeding, reproduction and migration of a large number of species such as whales, dolphins, sharks, stingrays, turtles, and fish. These ecological benefits positively impact the economy. Despite remaining mostly in the high seas, the species that visit the dome benefit tourism on the coast of Central America by providing activities such as whale watching, turtle nesting beaches, and sport fishing. The thermal dome is also in the path for important maritime traffic routes. Central America is an important region for maritime transport due to the influence of the Panama Canal. It is estimated that about 40 boats cross this channel every day. That is approximately 14,000 boats per year.
The relevance of the Costa Rica thermal dome in terms of the economics of the region is really important. The amounts of carbon fixed in this area are superior to all the emissions of the Central American vehicular fleet. Not only that, but a lot of the economic importance of species related with fisheries in the region thrive in this area due to the high concentration of organic matter and food that is available for them. So important activities, economical activities like sport fishing, like artisanal fisheries, like tourism are dependent on the process that is occurring in the Costa Rica thermal dome.
There is great pressure on the thermal dome by commercial fishing activities, and some captured populations are not well understood, making this an area highly vulnerable to overexploitation. Overfishing has generated a loss of between 70 and 80% in shark populations around the world. Species such as yellowfin tuna, dorado, and billfish are some of the species of great commercial interest that are caught in the thermal dome area. The large number of boats that move in the waters of the dome increase the probability of impact with blue whales, which, as we know, circulate in this area. Additionally, human-made ocean noise from maritime traffic, seismic exploration for oil or gas, sonars, and others have increased 100 times since the industrial era, doubling in intensity in recent years. This excess noise has caused fatal stranding or deaths of marine species, hearing damage, long-term evasion of some areas, stress, and reduced reproductive capacity. Plastic pollution is another latent threat to the oceans, and the dome is no exception. Water samples collected in the dome for a plankton study showed plastic microparticles from the continent. Ingested garbage, including microplastics, can affect the fauna of the sea, and even humans. Being in international waters or high seas, the dome is an area that lacks a regulatory framework for its protection. Although it is true the dome is located mostly in the high seas, at certain times it reaches the jurisdictional waters of the Central American countries. So two legal systems need to coexist in order to achieve its management. For this reason, it is important to promote an ecosystem approach among marine governance of the Central American countries and coordination between international and regional agencies. Since 2012, Marviva has worked hand-in-hand with environmental, fisheries, and maritime navigation authorities to strengthen government and regional capacities on social, environmental, and economic relevance. Generating scientific knowledge about the dome has been key to sensitize decision makers about the importance of conserving this area.
The Costa Rica thermal dome is under threat because of different activities that occur in the region. One of that is the navigation. About 4% of all the navigation of the world crosses this area, generating impacts not only with noise, pollution, but direct impact of chips with cetaceans especially. So this is an issue that has to be resolved. The other one is, of course, fisheries. Being a very productive area, there is a high concentration of fishing activity in this area, especially for tuna, and vessels from around 14 countries congregate in this region to capture tuna. The need to create a governance system for this region is paramount, and the need to regulate fishing and navigation activities in this region is the only way to ensure the future preservation of the services and resources that are provided by the dome.
Yes, the dome is special. It offers great benefits and urgent action is needed for its protection. The path is full of challenges, but perhaps very soon the thermal dome shall become one of the first sites on the high seas with a governance framework to ensure its management and conserve its resources and services.
Voilà, alors le deuxième... Vous m'entendez? Pardon? Ah, sorry. Oui. So, bon, pardon. Donc, the second ecosystem part of the Sargasso project is the Sargasso Sea ecosystem. So, for this, we're going to have a video from David Freestone from the Sargasso Sea Commission that will explain what are the characteristics of this floating and moving ecosystem in the high seas. So, thank you.
Hello, my name is Faye, and I work for the Sargasso Sea Commission. I'm a marine research fellow there, and I've been asked to give this presentation today on the Sargasso Sea ecosystem. I live in Bermuda, so I'm really lucky in that I get to see this incredible sargassum ecosystem up close when it washes into our shores. Bermuda is the only land mass within the Sargasso Sea, which is the only sea in the world without land boundaries. The Sargasso Sea is located in the North Atlantic Ocean, and its boundaries are defined by a series of circulating ocean currents that form the North Atlantic subtropical gyre. It's home to a unique high seas ecosystem characterized by the floating sargassum that forms sprawling mats on the surface of the water. Sargassum is a kind of holopelagic macroalgae. It floats at the surface and reproduces by fragmentation. It never attaches to the bottom at any stage in its life cycle. It's a valuable living matrix on the open Sargasso Sea, which would otherwise be this ocean desert of endless blue. The floating mats are colonized by small invertebrates and fish, and support a complex ecosystem which has been called the golden floating rainforest of the Atlantic. When many people think of the high seas, what springs to mind are iconic species like whales, marlin, and dolphins. But what I find fascinating about the sargassum ecosystem is that it supports some of the smallest creatures that you would never think capable of living on the open sea. Sargassum supports 10 endemic species. These are small, highly camouflaged organisms specially adapted to live their whole lives within the sargassum mats on the high seas. The adaptations are enchanting. From shrimp species which mimic different parts of the sargassum algae, to the speckled swimming crab that perches among the fronds, to the bumbling sargassum nudibranch, which is golden colored and eats hydroids that grow on the algae itself. In the Caribbean, mass blooms of sargassum happen regularly. The sargassum washes in and rots on the beaches, releasing poisonous hydrogen sulfide. It also sinks to the bottom inshore, which causes problems because it smothers coral reefs and seagrass beds. In Bermuda, we don't have this same relationship with sargassum. What washes in forms part of the coastal ecosystem. As it moves over the inshore reefs, fish pick through it for all the invertebrates, larvae, eggs, and juvenile fish that colonize it on the high seas. When it washes up on shore, scavengers like crabs and birds pick through it too, and the accumulated sargassum helps to stabilize our beaches. It's important to remember that where it belongs on the high seas, sargassum is absolutely essential to support communities of marine life, forming a really important part of the life history for a lot of species. I've gotten to observe some of the incredible high seas creatures that are supported by the algae. Sometimes lined seahorses make their home in pelagic sargassum, growing fleshy protrusions to better mimic the algae. Perhaps the most iconic sargassum endemic creature is the sargassum frogfish, which has a pair of prehensile fins which it uses to walk around on the sargassum mats. Aside from the endemic species, sargassum is vital to the life histories of a wide variety of animals. Sargassum mats act as a nursery for many juvenile stage fish of great economic value and global significance, including dolphinfish, jacks, mackerel, wahoo, tuna, and billfish. It's a spawning ground for white marlin and blue marlin. And filefish, triggerfish, and tripletails are also attracted to the mats. Flying fish even make bubble nests and lay their eggs within it, which are a significant source of food for larger species. All these tiny animals that live within sargassum in turn support communities of larger fish that feed beneath it, and the National Marine Fisheries Service has designated sargassum as essential fish habitat. 4 of the 7 species of sea turtle are known to associate with sargassum. Green, hawksbill, loggerhead, and Kemp's Ridley turtles all use sargassum as nursery habitat. The huge leatherback turtle also uses the Sargasso Sea as a migratory corridor. It's thought that the open ocean provides these young turtles with a safer area to spend their early years, because there's less predators on the high seas than in inshore waters. Juveniles are extremely vulnerable, and so sargassum provides them with cover as well as food. At this age, they eat sargassum as well as the small creatures living within it and marine insects. The Sargasso Sea is also the only location that 2 species of anguillid eel, the American and European eel, are known to spawn. Spawning has never been observed and eggs have never been found, but the Sargasso Sea is the area where the tiniest leptocephali have been collected. Both species have a fascinating catadromous life cycle, relying on fresh and brackish waters for feeding and growing, and oceanic waters for breeding. After spawning in the Sargasso Sea, the larval eels migrate inshore up rivers to grow. When they reach reproductive maturity, which may take up to 20 years, they travel back to the Sargasso Sea to spawn before death. In terms of larger animals, the Sargasso Sea also supports a range of cetaceans and sharks. It's the only known pupping location for the endangered porbeagle shark, and it has been suggested by scientists that porbeagles might even predate on the migrating adult American eels. Tiger sharks can be seen off of Bermuda in the summer, and the Bermuda Shark Project is a significant tagging project for these sharks. Through their tagging efforts, they've presented evidence of an annual tiger shark migration from the Caribbean to Bermuda through the Sargasso Sea. The Sargasso Sea also acts as a migratory corridor for various species of rays, whales, and dolphins. Humpback whales are the most significant species, and their annual migrations from the tropics to the poles take them through the Sargasso Sea off the shores of Bermuda. They've even been observed playing in sargassum, and they might brush up against it as a method to dislodge parasites. It's clear that the Sargasso Sea supports an incredible ecosystem, from the tiniest pelagic drifters to some of the largest marine mammals. This iconic area of the ocean, which is both economically important and populated with charismatic mega and microfauna, is without doubt deserving of robust protection.
So I would like to thank Jorge Jimenez and David Freestone for providing these 2 incredible videos. So our next speaker is Lars Stemman. Will talk to us about the ocean microbiomes for the Tara Ocean Foundation. Thank you, Lars.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Okay, so it's my pleasure and a great honor to speak for hundreds of scientists who have been working the last 15 years with the Foundation Tara in the frame of a consortium that is called the Tara Ocean Consortium. And we have been supported in the last years by the Fonds Français pour l'Environnement Mondial to try to convert all the knowledge we have acquired to information that can be used for different public, including the policymakers. So I'm Lars Stemann, I'm professor at Sorbonne University, and I will try to explain you how we have addressed 4 main questions about plankton. So plankton is more than the microbiome, it's all the living organisms that drift with the current. And the 4 questions we had were who they are, how many they are, what they are doing, are they sensitive to climate change. So plankton can be divided in 2 groups. The phytoplankton, which capture carbon dioxide by photosynthesis and is the source of life in the open sea, while the zooplankton are the heterotrophic organisms which feed on the phytoplankton. There is a high biodiversity and they have an important biogeochemical role for many elements and in particular for carbon. So if we look at the services, the ecosystem services they provide to us, they provide the service of fixing carbon by the phytoplankton at the basis of the food chain and bring it up to the fishes, ensuring food security for our society. That's one aspect. Another aspect is that this community of organisms produce detritus. Those detritus are particles, and particles are attracted by gravity, so they sink to the bottom of the ocean. And by this process, they contribute to the sequestration of carbon in the deep sea. However, not everything goes to the fish, and not everything goes to the bottom of the ocean. Most of it is degraded by bacteria in the ocean that would, time by time, process the labile organic matter, which is fresh, to dead organic matter, which cannot be used anymore, that we call black carbon. So, with Tara Ocean, we have tried to focus on a specific part of the whole life size of life in the ocean, which is, let's say, what we call the microbiome, which includes all the unicellular, being bacteria, even viruses, to the small crustaceans such as the copepods. And those are only one aspect of the life in the ocean, and as you can see, the bigger you are, the less abundant you are in the water column. And what is very important is to understand how the flow of energies goes from the autotroph, the primary producers, to the users, the fish being here and users. And what you see here as a slope on the log scale of abundance versus size is a proxy that we call the biomass spectrum. And this biomass spectrum informs us about the efficiency of the flow. So Tara has been contributing to the science on plankton in different ways. First, by working on observation. We have developed specific observation gears and protocol to collect the community composition of plankton, so the biocenosis, and also the information about the habitat, the biotop. We have been using and developing genomic methods, but also quantitative imaging methods to try to answer the 2 first questions, who and how many. We also been looking at RNA to look at what is activity to answer to the question, what are they doing? So we have been sampling the ocean, let's say almost all over the world, as you can see on this map, and we have been looking at the community composition of plankton at the surface to the deep sea. That's very important because we have a lot of knowledge on the surface water, but we have a very weak knowledge on the mesopelagic layers. That's the contribution for, let's say, the methodology. But we also have published and we made research and we published paper, and there are more than 100 papers out coming from the Tara expedition. We are hundreds of scientists, so it's a big group, and I cannot spend all my time speaking about all the discoveries that were made, and I will try to focus on two aspects which are, I think, are relevant for the Congress here, which are developing tools that could be used as information tools to predict future states of the ecosystem. So we have been looking at those tools in two directions. One is mathematical modeling, in which we lay out simple hypotheses on the functioning of the ecosystem. We develop equations, and then we try to predict the state of the ecosystem. So this is here, for example, a work carried on by my colleague who is here, where he has been modeling the size, the biomass distribution of plankton from the phytoplankton here, or the bacteria and phytoplankton here, to the fishes here. And he has been using the data of Tara to constrain the model. Well, you don't see it here, but you would see the observation by Tara here. And there was quite a really nice match. So, secondly, now that we know the process, we can recalculate for any point in the world the situation of this biomass spectrum. And here is a map that is obtained with this model of the biomass of plankton in the ocean. It does that for the surface, but also for the mesopelagic layer. And then we can compare it with independent data sets that are available in our community. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is by using the large information, the vast information coming from the genomic analysis, where we discovered hundreds, thousands of kind of new genomic species. So we can look at the biodiversity of the community composition, and we can try to link it to the habitat. And that's done by what we call niche modeling. And then when we know the relationship, the correlation between the niche and the organism, we can use the future state of the ocean, so for example, scenario of the RCP 8.5, to predict what would be the biodiversity in the future. And here I present you some data as a function of latitude. You have the diversity of bacteria, photosynthetic bacteria, heterotrophic bacteria, and then other groups. And what you see here is an anomaly of the diversity of the future state of the ecosystem relative to now. And so you can see that regions, for example here, temperate and polar regions, have increased their biodiversity in bacteria, have increased the biodiversity of copepods, but some other regions we have decreased the biodiversity. And what is important with this tool is that now we can also compare it to the current importance of these different latitudinal bands in terms of carbon export, fish catch, and the number of MPA. And we can see that the temperate and high latitudes are regions of very specific interest for us because they provide us services. So now we know that the plankton there is very sensitive relative to the global change. So that's the second way we are working. So all the knowledge that we have acquired is available in the literature, and we are still working on data which are sometimes now 15 years old. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lars, for this very interesting presentation. And our next speaker is Émilie Ferret from the Wildlife Conservation Society, and she will talk to us about the underwater noise and its impacts on the marine ecosystem. So thank you, Émilie.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us today. So I'm here on behalf of our expert scientists, so I'm asking a little bit of indulgence, but I'm very happy to be presenting some of the work we're doing, but also more generally the issue of underwater noise, anthropogenic underwater noise more specifically. And so marine species, So marine species are highly dependent on sound for their ecology, like feeding behavior, reproduction, spatial orientation, and so this is sound is a critical component, like that can impact them, and like there is now a recognition that with the increasing activities in the ocean, there is an increasing impact and an increasing level and scale of anthropogenic noise that can impact them, and it's recognized as a conservation issue for marine species from invertebrate to marine mammal. However, this is kind of a new area in science. This is like in the last decade or so, and so a lot needs to be discovered and understood. And so I wanted to show this graph that are demonstrating how noise can go through the water column and impact, for example, intraspecific communication, as it can impact like growth and reproduction or predator-prey relationship. And so we do need to know more, and how do we get to collect those data? What kind of method can we use? What knowledge do we need in order to be able to make recommendations and tools to mitigate the impact of anthropogenic underwater noise? So WCS has been involved in study on underwater noise, and we've been looking at several types of data. So first, we need to know what the focal species are. So I'm sorry, it's quite heavily focused on marine mammals here. But so we've been looking at marine mammal distribution in all the region where we're working. So for example, in the Western Indian Ocean. And we need this data in order to be able to figure out where the higher impact will be for marine species conservation. So several methods can be available, from vessel survey to telemetry, which allow like real-time data collection on mammals and the development of distribution map. But then that's not enough. That's something we've been doing, and so now we need to understand what is the noise and how it does impact and overlay with species distribution. So I'm showing this map of the work we've been doing in the Arctic and Berengi. So we were studying beluga, and we were able to identify the migration route and the reproductive sites. And so we've deployed acoustic units, so it looks like that, underwater, in order to evaluate the ambient noise and to be able to understand the soundscape. And also our acoustic unit allowed us to record beluga vocalization. So this study lasted over a year, which allowed us to demonstrate or to find out several things. First, that beluga would stop vocalizing or leave the area as a result of ship traversing or passing through in the 5 kilometers near the beluga populations. And so this is one of the behavior and change of behavior that underwater noise can have on marine mammals that we were able to demonstrate. We were able to demonstrate as well that the sound was moving differently depending on the season as a result of the change in sea ice presence. And so those information are necessary to be able to provide the best recommendation in the future. However, having the sound on one end and the distribution map on the other end is not sufficient. So we need to move towards integrated mapping. So this look at the work of Ocean Mind, and this is an example of soundscape map that can be developed. This one has been developed by Quiet Oceans, one of our partners. And it when we use, when you use those maps, you can identify the area of overlay between marine species presence and then the traffic, and here the impact of noise. And that's what is needed in order for us to fully understand how underwater noise, anthropogenic underwater noise, can impact various species. Here it's mammals, but it needs to be done on a various number of other species. And so once we have all the data, how can we use it to make informed decision and to suggest recommendation? So I've provided here a few examples of what it could look like. Not all of it is WCS at all, it's just more of a general overview. So those data can feed atlases, so I've just shown the Marine Mammal Protected Area Task Force atlases, and that allows people to have access to distribution map online. You can, of course, provide recommendation on area, on zoning, and how to identify areas that are particularly sensitive. and to classify them accordingly, how to suggest area of seasonality where you need to minimize impact. That leads to suggestions. So this is a work of the Marine Education and Research Society, and they've used this map of mammal distribution to provide recommendation on speed limitation from traffic. And that's one of the recommendations that can be done from those data. You have obviously the publication that I use to lobby and also to provide, the necessary knowledge so that decision can be made accordingly. I wanted to just mention this particular map here. So there was a shipping line crossing over a site of importance for marine mammal, and so it's been suggested to move this traffic line. So all those are the type of recommendation that can only be proposed and that can only be suggested once all the data prior have been provided. I also wanted to mention that I've focused on management measures, but there are a lot of work that needs to be done with on the technological and engineering part of ships, like can we improve propellers, and there are like consortium that are working on these themes that can also provide other type of recommendation. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you for taking us already into the tools. And I think it will be the perfect transition for our second part. But before we do that, I suggest we have a small round of question and answers for our panelists that are present. And I would like to also talk to you about this publication in the published by the FFEM on the seamounts in the Southwest Indian Ocean project that Frederick introduced to you. So you have the QR code and you will be able to access the publication if you're interested in knowing more about the seamounts in the Southwest Indian Ocean and this incredible Walter Shoal south of Madagascar. So if anyone any question for our panelists, please raise your hands.
Hello, thank you. On the question of the project on high seas phytoplankton production, how long is your database over time? And in relation with that, how much of an idea of trends in total primary production by phytoplankton you're able to detect? Because we all know from the IPCC that due to acidification, it is expected that primary productivity of phytoplankton might decline through the increasing difficulty to constitute the shells. So have you observed any of this phenomenon? Is your database long enough to already detect that?
Lars?
Thank you for your question. So I think that definitely having time series of phytoplankton, but also the whole community of the living organism in the ocean is very important. But time series was not the scope of TARA, which is a kind of snapshot in the late 2010 of the state of the system. But the idea is to go back there, I mean, make the same tour, maybe 1 decade or 2 decades after to see any change. So we cannot really address the question that you're mentioning. I wanted also to stress that TARA has been looking at, was dedicated for the biodiversity. And we came up to the functioning through using RNA, for example, by using RNA or also by developing models. But that's so processes are not really the scope of TARA, and probably satellites are the best for the phytoplankton. Yes, I wanted to mention also biodiversity is not functionality in an ecosystem. Sometimes a system with a high biodiversity does not have big functionality.
Thank you very much, Lars. And yeah, please stay for the second part because we'll talk more about plankton diversity.
Just a quick one. For a practitioner on the West Australian coast, we have a range of biodiversity conservation activity based in area-based MPAs and other. they're really struggling to understand how to deal with anthropogenic noise, in that most of the pressures, we know that this is one of the pressure, but when we think about anthropogenic noise, we're not sure how to practically set up a good baseline measurement and equally assess the effects of that. So for example, Shark Bay, a major, beautiful, one of the world's nicer areas that's still in very good condition, has lots of cetaceans, lots of dugong, lots of fish community, major area for biodiversity in Western Australia. We have a lot of boat traffic, we have a lot of oil and gas going off nearby, and practically the managers of those types of areas don't know how to grab hold of the time series of measuring noise. And all the studies we're running are typically done at the Commonwealth level, so at a much higher level, and these are offshore studies with the boomers linked to oil and gas prospecting and such like. But the practical delivery of understanding what's happening and the mainstreaming of this type of activity has not really touched the ground. And I just would like to think about taking that bottom-up view a little bit more than just, well, we know this is a problem and we've got 4 studies of 4 whale populations, and try to think about how we're going to get ordinary managers on the ground to think of this within their pressure profile. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Emily, you want to?
Well, thank you for your question or your comments. Well, this is the aim of some of the study, including some of the study we're planning to do in the future, is to develop the methodology or to help develop the tool that can help practitioners to evaluate the impact of the noise and also to have access to those methodologies. The critical part here is also partnership. We will not be able to solve the problem at the local or global level without the partnership between scientists, practitioners, civil society, etc. And so, like, those pilot studies, even though they might seem like site-specific or species-specific, they provide new methodology or modeling tools that can be available for practitioners to put in place practical measure to limit anthropogenic noise. So that's what we're hoping to do.
Thank you. Another question? Guillermo?
Thank you very much. Since Jorge Jimenez participated via video, I don't know if you can answer this question, but I'm very curious if the Costa Rica Thermal Dome project aims to fill an important governance gap right on top of the Costa Rica Thermal Dome. As you know, we have 2 types of RFMOs, Regional Fisheries Management Organizations, that manage transboundary fish stocks. And in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, the tuna RFMO captures the entire Costa Rica Thermal Dome. But for non-tuna RFMOs, we have a 2,000-kilometer band with no RFMO. And I'm just wondering if one of the objectives of the project is to encourage the international community to fill that governance gap. Thank you.
So I don't know who wants to. Yeah. So Denis, merci.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, so I'm part of the project. I'm an economist and working on the social economic dimension. So the project, the title of the project is thinking about hybrid governance for Sargasso Sea and the thermal dome. It's about imagine some kind of innovative governance to address the issue you mentioned. Yeah, so this is really part of the project.
Thank you very much. Another question? If not, I think we will take a 5-minute break, and then we will go into the second part of this session and to go more deeply into these tools for the protection of this high seas ecosystem. So stretch and drink some water and come back or stay here. Thank you. faire... ils vont se lever. Ah, on les met, tu veux les asseoir? On peut, hein. Mais il faut qu'ils viennent, hein. Qu'ils se lèvent. Non? C'est plus dynamique. Ouais. Mais ils se lèvent, ils se rassoient, non? Ou je sais pas. Tu veux qu'on s'assoie? On peut s'asseoir, hein. Fais vite ça. Ok. Ok. Le problème, c'est que les gens les utilisent. Okay. So, for this second part of this session on high seas from science to decision, I would like to introduce you to our chair, moderator for this debate, and it's François Simard. So I asked how I should introduce him. He said, as an old friend of the house. So it's an old friend and members of 2 commissions of IUCN. So François, thank you very much for being here with us, and I give you the floor.
Merci, Aurélie. Thank you, Aurélie. So, thank you for inviting me for this, facilitating this session, this second part of this event on the high seas. My name is François Simard. I was Deputy Director of the Global Marine and Polar Program at IUCN for several years, so a number of you know me already. As an introduction, I would say that working with IUCN is always trying to make the link between science and policy. It's basically what we are always trying to do. The mission of IUCN being influencing societies for nature conservation. It's the challenge we have always is this one, is really to link knowledge, more than science, by the way, knowledge, plural, and policy. And regarding the high seas, as it was said so many times, it's huge. High seas, it's all the big part of the ocean. It's something that we don't know much. It's something that is often very complex, very diverse, and not all blue like it is seen by our eyes, but very complex with a lot of things happening in 3 dimensions and even 4 if we look at time. So science that goes with high seas is also very, very complex. This means that we have even a bigger challenge, because trying to base decisions on some very complex scientific or other knowledges is really a big challenge. So this session, now we have in front of us 50 minutes or 1 hour to discuss, I would say two questions, but it's one. But I can divide it in 2 questions. The first would be, what is the knowledge we need to make decisions or to take measures, to decide on measures, area-based measures. I'm talking about area-based management here. Area-based measure in the high seas. So what is the knowledge we need for setting those measures? And the question that goes together but after, what knowledge do we need to implement those measures? So I have with me some experts. We have a panel of experts that will try to first answer those questions according to their expertise and their specialty. And then I would really like to have a discussion with all of you. I see in the room a number of colleagues that are extremely knowledgeable on these questions. And I really would like to have everyone taking the floor and giving us his or her or their thinking. So we have also people online. In my list of panelists, I have online David Johnson, who you may know, who is our, not the head, but of the EPSA process. Let's say I'm a big expert on the EPSA process for many years. I've been working a lot on this, and the really knows what an EPSA is. He will explain us and how this is one important knowledge to set up the measures of area-based management measures in the ICs. And in the room we have Lars and Beg who are our Tara friends working on plankton. So already Lars told us, but he can tell us more about how we should or we can take plankton issues into consideration for setting up measures. After that, Aurélie is here. Now she's not chairing anymore, so she's a panelist. And she will talk about whatever she wants, by the way, but mapping and seamounts and things like that. And I just look at my list. And Denis, of course, last but not least. Denis Bailly is here with us also as a panelist to try to explain how all this can be linked together by some processes. Yeah, we have, and then we, of course, yeah, sorry, and we have first a video by David Freestone. He's sleeping at the moment because it's in the US, so he cannot be with us. But he sent us a video on the governance for the Sargasso Sea. So first we look at this video, and after we'll have this discussion.
Right, good morning. My name's David Freestone. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Sargasso Sea Commission. I'm really sorry that I'm not able to be with you in Marseille for the IUCN Congress, and particularly for this this important launch event for the FFEM project, which we've been working on for nearly 18 months now. Very excited to see it finally taking shape. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the governance of the Sargasso Sea. You already heard from Faye, very excellent presentation on the importance of the ecosystem of the Sargasso Sea, and there we see it. But it's also important from a legal point of view because it's an area of the ocean which is subject to what's been called fragmented jurisdiction. So there are two main organizations which have overarching authority to deal with certain specific sectoral functions, such as the Seabed Authority, the ISA, which governs seabed and mineral mining on the high seas, on the deep sea, and also the International Maritime Organization, IMO, which deals with vessel movements and discharges from vessels. But other than that, there is, in this area of the high seas, which I'm just using my cursor here, around to the south of Bermuda, 34th parallel there really is neither a regional fishing organization nor a regional environmental management organization. There is a tuna management organization, ICAT, which deals with the whole of the Atlantic, but this area, surprisingly, between the Americas and Europe, you would think much traveled, is actually quite a gap in the global governance, ocean governance system. So the aims of the Sargasso Sea project, we started in 2010, 11 years ago now, was to achieve international recognition of the global importance of the Sargasso Sea, and I think we probably are well on our way to achieving that. And then, as importantly, to work with existing organizations, international sectoral organizations, to achieve better protection for the Sargasso Sea under the terms of the Law of the Sea Convention, and to use this experience as an indication of what's possible under the current ABNJ regime, because, of course, that's being negotiated by the UN as we speak. Our main achievement in the early years was 2014 was to have 5 governments come together in Bermuda to sign the Hamilton Declaration on Collaboration for the Conservation of the Sargasso Sea. That's a picture of Sylvia Earle, who was the chair at that point of our steering committee. We now have 10 government signatories to the Hamilton Declaration: the Azores, the Bahamas, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, Canada, the Cayman Islands, Dominican Republic, Monaco, United Kingdom, United States. We have a number of governments that have been fellow travelers that have been supporting us, even though they haven't signed. And these would include the Netherlands, Sweden, South Africa, but now, of course, France, I hope, because they are actually supporting us in a very practical way, as well as a number of observer organizations. That's a meeting, that's the participants at the meeting there. The area which we designated as the area of collaboration is in the western basin of the North Atlantic, to the west of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And the governance structure for this declaration, which is a non-binding political declaration, is fairly light. We have a meeting of signatories. Since COVID started, we've actually been meeting every 2 months, although initially it was only every year. And we have a Sargasso Sea Commission, which, unlike traditional commissions, is not made up of representatives of the signatories, but because it's a non-binding arrangement, but of independent experts who serve in their personal capacity. And again, we meet pretty well every 2 months. And then the Sargasso Sea Secretariat, lean and mean body, you've met both of the members of that, Faye and myself. And then we have financial mechanisms both in the US and also in Bermuda. The role of the signatories really under the declaration is to pursue collaboration and cooperation in furtherance of the vision of the declaration, to provide advice and guidance to the Commission, and then to, as members of the organizations, and many of them are members of the organizations which we're working with, to take forward proposals for protection measures to those bodies. The Commission, by contrast, has a non-managerial role. It has a stewardship role with a mandate to keep the health, productivity, and resilience of the Sargasso Sea under continual review, to develop a work program and action plans for the conservation of the ecosystem. We have 6 current members, 1 resigned, pending re-election, and we have a reappointment process going forward. So from representatives from Bermuda, the UK, from the Bahamas, from Canada, the US, and also Professor De Moore is a joint national of the UK and Canada. We've engaged with a large number of international organizations because there is this very complex framework, and we have a large number of partners who have been very important in collaborating partners who help us in the development of our program. And we're delighted, that short review of the system that we've put in place, we're delighted now to be partners in this major initiative financed by the FFEM to contribute to the governance, a hybrid governance system of the high seas. Thank you.
Thank you, David. You cannot hear me, but so yes, thanks for presenting this Sargasso Sea project and the governance of it. About this project that David mentioned, it's an important project funded by FFEM, and there is another project in parallel funding by the GF, and that will begin together more or less, and will allow us really to tackle very seriously this issue of what are the knowledge, what is the science necessary to make sure we propose at least the good measures. I said propose because, of course, all this is in the high seas, and all this is linked to the BBNG discussion, and we don't know yet what will be exactly the process in place in the future, in hopefully the very next future. Then when we have a decision, we'll have a body, hopefully, working on the BBNG and an agreement, and within this, we'll have processes to propose marine protected areas or not, but area-based management tools, which is the language of the BBNG. And of course, these ABMTs will have to be based on science or on knowledge. So we're really in the center of the discussion here. What would be the process, but what would be the knowledge supporting those processes for setting up those area-based management tools in the high seas? And this project of the Sargasso Sea and the Costa Rica, but not the Costa Rica, but the thermal dome of Costa Rica, are 2 examples very interesting because they are really fantastic place for looking at that. So I'm back to my colleagues for the panel. Maybe, I'm not sure you want to sit here, those who are present in the room or not, but maybe it will be easier if you want to sit here. But first, maybe, yeah, we have 2 more. Or bye, please come. But first I will give the floor to David online, not because he's online, but because I think that the EPSA process, hi David, the EPSA process is really something that deserves all our attention while talking about knowledge for setting up area-based management measures in the future. And the EPSA process is not new, but I'll let David explain us what is this process and how it is important for providing us the knowledge necessary that we will need for setting up those ABMTs. David, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Francois. Hope people can hear me, and I'm very sorry I can't be there in person. Francois, you have been very generous in introducing me. My other credentials really are, I was lucky enough to be at the OSPAR Commission when high seas marine protected areas were designated by parties in 2010 and 2012. And I followed the BBNJ process through the PrepCom and through BBNJ with colleagues such as Christina Gierde, and informed by important IUCN workshops in Gland, which Francois, you convened with Aurélie. And most recently, I'm part of the advisory board for Sargasso. So it's really, really important that FFEM have chosen to support this particular project, I believe. Francois, you mentioned two important questions. Firstly, what science is needed to take decisions. And I think the presentations we've listened to have been really on the money for this. It's all about baseline information. The high seas is data poor, as we all know. And as the Tara presentation highlighted, we really need modeling, and particularly for the biology, we need proxies and analogs as well. But it's not just that. As Emily highlighted in her presentation, we need to understand the risk and threat of human uses as well. So we heard about shipping and fishing and noise, but there's still chemical pollution, deep sea mining, and possibility of geoengineering and so forth. So that's really where the EPSA process, and we had a session yesterday which was chaired by Fenia on the Impana session, which looked at scientific information that can be brought forward. And the EPSA process, the CBD EPSA process, is one such way of bringing forward information. And we learned also about important marine mammal areas and the prospect of important marine turtle areas and IBAs. This is all bringing information. So, for example, the Walter Shoal was identified as an EPSA from a 2012 workshop. There's particularly impressive giant species of spiny lobster there. But quite often, these areas are identified on the basis of threatened and endangered or vulnerable species as well. And that takes me to this. So baseline information is really important, but then in putting together measures for marine conservation in the high seas, there also has to be justification against a set of criteria. And there are different criteria according to different area-based management tools. Many of you are familiar with those. So in my experience, the OSPAR background documents for their MPAs were really important. And I think for Sargasso, the Sargasso Sea science case, which will be amplified by BIOS in Bermuda, and also the Costa Rica Thermal Dome Maui Viva Atlas, which is an excellent piece of work which has been undertaken under part of the Gobi project that I'm involved with and coordinate, but will be built upon by Duke University and Global Fisheries Watch as well. Francois, the second part of your question was, well, what about implementing? And key to this is the legal mandate. So that's why BBNJ is so important. And as Yannick highlighted at the very start, this is going to be important, particularly for adjacent coastal states as well. And it's a case of building political will, and that requires important leadership. And I think we ought to acknowledge, particularly in Sargasso, this effort and the stamina needed to build consensus. Jorge Jimenez and David Freestone have both been, both shown great leadership over years for these projects, and it's we need to make a case for those two areas to be in place for when BBNJ is able to give a legal mandate. I think it was Guillermo who asked a question about governance gaps. For the Costa Rica Thermal Dome, there's an Antigua Convention, a regional seas convention, which is not yet into force. So again, there are governance gaps to be filled. And I think then also there needs to be certainty and confidence in the science case. And Serge Garcia yesterday in a talk about fisheries and conservation was talking about, for example, ICES, so the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. It's an independent scientific body, and that was very useful in the OSPAR case of confirming these high seas MPAs and building confidence in the background document. Then again, there's communication and transparency, particularly at a national level. This is between ministries, putting in place management plans and recommendations, and then ability to do remote sensing and monitoring and enforcement. So there's a multitude of skills and information needed. And I like Kim Friedman's question about noise. So for example, we need to put in place noise registers. We need to understand what technological aspects could reduce shipping noise, for example, reduce ambient noise. And then should there be quieter areas? A bit like there are emission zone areas for ships, could there be areas where shipping has to go more slowly or avoid or that type of thing? So I know Denis will speak much more about the Sargasso project, but I think that's a really exciting development, and I'm really pleased to be associated with it. A little bit of insight, Francois.
Thanks a lot, David. Thank you very much, and brilliant intervention, as I thought. I was sure about it. No, a really comprehensive landscape of what is the issue here. Any reaction to that? Ernesto, please. Yeah. Microphone. Somebody has a microphone. Yeah. Thank you. Merci. Yeah. Ernesto.
Thanks very much. I have a question to perhaps you or any of the panelists on one question which in my personal view has received relatively little attention. And when we deal with the high seas, there's a question to me on my personal experience that comes to mind immediately. Whatever we decide for the high seas, who's going to police it and why? Policing the high seas is extremely expensive, I know it from experience. Then in the existing systems of managing high seas resources, we have a very clear linkage which makes things easier. And that is, for example, like in NAFO, in Eastern Canada, those who fish and those who benefit from the ecosystems are those who have the responsibility to pay for the control and to exert it. But as we move to measures that will basically tend to remove fishing, remove exploitation from these high seas areas, the link is broken. So countries might react to large MPAs by saying, well, if I can't fish here, why should we contribute and invest in policing it? So the question to me is that whatever we dream of for the high seas, who is going to police it and why?
No, it's a good question. The question would be based on which knowledge we can try to police it also. Somebody wants to answer this? Maybe we have for example, Global Fishing Watch would be a source of information for doing that, for example, but there is many other things. I don't know. We want to, Denis? Yes.
Yes, of course, this is a key issue, but I would make two remarks. Why should an area-based management be a management that excludes activities? I don't think it's not the point. We're just going to control and reduce and put some rules. And this is very expensive, but it's expensive in the sea, as we know. I think we rely very much, and Francois just mentioned Global Fishing Watch. We rely very much on our capacity of remote control, and the question will not be really to find out the infringement. The problem will be the willingness of any state to find or to control. And we have some international regulation, we have the responsibility of the port, we have different principles that exist now in international law that we can use for that. But for sure, the rapid increase in our capacity to see what happens at sea will be crucial in the efficiency and implementation.
Thank you, Denis. Yes.
Thank you. Maybe a follow-up question to what has been just said. It's we're talking about how to manage areas, but I think that an important part of it is how we manage data. So how data are shared, how data are used, by whom, for what, and to whom. So how do we address these questions about data?
Very good question. Thank you. Aurélie?
Yeah, and just to add to that and to react to what David just said, it's the confidence in the data that is provided to decision making that is super important. And I think that's what this whole double session is about what is the science that is needed to support decision making and how we communicate, how we share it openly, etc., to the right bodies and to arrive to a protection measure that is efficient and implemented. And I think there will be a lot for once we have a BBNG treaty in place about the implementation, and of course the monitoring, control and surveillance will be crucial, and this is a key point of how, but I think that state has to come together and it will not rely on the adjacent states to be in charge of the control, of course, because it will be totally unfair. So I think this question will have to be addressed following, in the BBNG treaty.
Thank you, Aurélie.
Yeah, just want to follow on that very important question. First, what I want to say that even in France, when maybe 3 decades ago they installed nuclear power plant in the Gironde or in other places, they were obliged to collect plankton, but nobody was following the results. And so they did collect the plankton, but there was no information coming from this survey. In fact, if you want to succeed in the data collection, to my point of view, you need an academic behind. You need someone who's interested in the question. Can be an academic, can be another one, but in the case of Bordeaux, it was an academic and the survey was very nice. And so that's one thing. I would not trust companies to do surveys, personally, because I think the quality will be very hard to match, and second, the database. Well, they do exist. In fact, I think we are all working in communities, and communities do not talk to each other. For the fish, we have the fish bank. For physics, we have different international data centers. So things exist. There are processes, but it's just that maybe people don't talk enough. But there are a lot of resources for data.
Thank you, Lars. And yes, please, Frederick.
Thank you. A few words. I would like to add that we have also to improve and to foster the capacity building in South Country, because it's very important to associate where there is some big issue in terms of illegal fisheries, for example, and they have to be part of the solution or partners of South. Thank you.
Sure. Lars again, please. Yeah.
Just sorry, a short comment. I completely agree with you. And one way of doing it, I see, because I'm a professor, I meet a lot of students, that even at the university, we should try to have students which are more interdisciplinary and able to share physical, biological information. And so that's even the case for developing countries, where we need to bring some capacities, but also in our countries.
Thank you. Any other comment, or David, you want to add something?
I think it's been said. I like the answers, and I think remote sensing will become increasingly important. I also think the RFMOs that work well, NIAF, NAFO, for example, I know best, they do a great job. So they really do undertake surveillance and monitoring of vessels and can identify vessels quickly.
Thank you, David. I think, yes, Guillermo.
Thank you very much. I think with this new treaty, after many decades, we're reopening the law of the sea, and we have an opportunity to innovate, especially when it comes to area-based management. We're trying to create the next generation of area-based management tools under this new treaty. So I think over the last few decades, we've learned a couple lessons that we can't just draw a two-dimensional box in the ocean and expect it to work. David, for instance, a few years ago published a paper showing how some of the EPSAs are becoming less effective under climate change. So I'm just wondering, in these topics of monitoring, control, and surveillance, climate change, based on my understanding of the current draft of the BBNJ treaty, it's not really contemplating these questions. So the question to the panel is, if and how we can ensure that topics such as climate change adaptation, when it comes to area-based management, or monitoring, control, and surveillance standards should be integrated. And on that latter point, I'm just curious, do you think that is the competence of the IMO and RFMOs to set those standards for member states? Or can the BBNJ have a say in terms of what expectations we should have for activities in the high seas? Or is that different competence? Thank you.
Well, thank you for this set of very good questions. And maybe who wants to... Kim, please, yes.
I have a follow-up question,
Please,
which
go ahead.
links quite well. In my experience, listening to people who negotiated the law of the sea, the BBNJ is not going to finish very, very quickly. So our opportunity to strengthen across agreements might offer us an opportunity in the post-2020 to set some bricks ready for this kind of step change of how we deal with things together. So in the post-2020, we have an opportunity. They're talking to strengthening across agreements. But when they talk about strengthening across agreements, they're really talking about the Rio Conventions and the MEAs. But what they really need to strengthen across agreements is to do that, but alongside things like regional and international fisheries management agreements. Because if they don't bring the mainstreaming into the camp to allow them to cross, then when we come to look at the BBNJ, they don't have the stepping stones on which to stand because the communities are still too far apart. Things like the port state measures, it offers us opportunities, but those conversations really take time to mature, and I suggest that the BBNJ is not going to close very soon, and this conversation might need some stepping stones before we come to a place where everyone can start shaking their head yes and say, okay, this is the type of arrangements we need to strengthen, rather than building a brand new arrangement which even takes another 10 years.
Well, thanks a lot, Kim. It's really important what you said, and clearly it's of course urgent to have a BBNJ agreement in place because we need really to take those measures, but at the same time we have to use the opportunity that it's long, taking a lot of time, the opportunity to prepare many things. I mean, preparing the cross agreement or preparing agreements or bodies to work together, and how we will do that. So I think this is really something important. I see Ernesto. Yeah, please. No, okay. But it's please go ahead, Ernesto. And okay, ladies
so
first and
it was
panelists
just
first.
to react. So I'm a bit more optimistic about the BBNJ, but I totally agree with you and I like the idea of building bricks. I mean, we have to have to strengthen what is already in place and to develop tools to share the science with tools that is useful for policy making and decision making. And I think, yeah, that's building bricks for when the BBNJ treaty is signed, and we will be ready to implement it with what we have built now. So I think it's super important. And François, if you let me maybe after, but introduce the MapMaker project. Okay, so I will show that to you.
It is in my plan to let you do that.
Okay, so I'm gonna just
I keep you Ernesto for
here. And if we can make, yeah, perfect. So MapMaker, it's a project that IUCN Global Marine and Polar Program had in collaboration with ETH Zurich. So it's the Polytechnical School of Switzerland, one of the two Polytechnical Schools of Switzerland. And it's a collaboration that is funded by the Geneva Science Policy Interface. So it's a one-year project on how to link science to policy. And we decided to work together on the plankton diversity projection. Okay. So that's the pavilion falling down. Let's hope this one is staying.
Okay.
So we decided to build an interactive web tool for decision makers to see the projection, future projection of plankton diversity in the future. So this is where you get when you get to the MapMaker tool, and this is the tool. You can choose to show species richness, for example. Then let's stay with the total plankton. Let's say that we follow the climate scenario of the business as usual, and we keep with the model mean. And so here we have a slide bar that goes from a timeline that goes from 2012 to 2100. So you can play and move along this sidebar, and you will see the changes in the species richness, for the plankton. It takes just a little bit of time to... I hope I have a good connection here. And you can, a bit further down, point on any of the area of the globe and see the time series of these changes. And you can compare, and you can have you can go back and say, okay, let's see, for example, the future changes in the biodiversity, so habitat suitability, and you have the same. You can go across. Okay, so and we are here in 2090 and things like that, and you can see the thing. So that's the idea is that really to give some tools to visualize what the changes can look like in the future if we do nothing, and if we decided to follow the Paris Agreement, which is not very in good position now, but you click here, and then you are in the climate scenario of the IPCC to follow the Paris Agreement. So that's, I wanted to show it to you and share it with you here as one of the tools that can help have this science go onto the decision making. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Aurélie. This is also a very brilliant tool because it's linked really data and policy to get all together. Maybe back to Ernesto. Yeah, please.
Excuse me, I don't want to speak too much, but if I have an opportunity. Another question which, in my view, is perhaps maybe wrong, but is not receiving enough attention on this. I think we all know that one of the most obvious effects of climate change is the displacement of many marine species towards higher latitudes in both the northern and the southern hemisphere. And that makes it that traditional instruments to manage those resources are becoming obsolete. For example, in Europe, the anchovy stock of the Bay of Biscay is managed on a spatial basis only for the Bay of Biscay. But now the bloody fish has extended to the North Sea and to Kattegat, where it is completely unmanaged. So that's the kind of problem we are finding when we establish area-based solutions to deal with species that are moving all the time. And then the question is that as we move to future MPAs, OECMs in the high seas, how do you think we can deal with the question of the displacement of the species and the fact that area-based solutions might actually become quickly obsolete because the fish and the other species are actually moving?
Well, this is clearly a very important question also, but I think scientists and also policymakers are beginning to understand the necessity to be dynamic, and in the high seas, the marine protected area, or whatever they are called, the BMTs or OECMs, will have to be somehow dynamic and to adapt. The adaptation concept is really important now for setting this. And behind this, the set of data or the knowledge is important, because it's based on knowledge that you will be able to have dynamic measures, special measures. But the concept of dynamic special measures is quite new. Although many people working in conservation have this in mind for years, but it's new in reality. And we are now facing the fact that either we do it or we don't really have good management measures, because it will, as you said, it will move, and it will not change soon. So, yeah, I maybe Aurélie wanted to say something, or Guillermo? Or
yeah, so
please.
Guillermo, if you want.
Or David,
yeah,
okay.
Bye, you want to say something about it? Yeah?
Bye. Alors, bye, David, Madame, and Guillermo.
Yeah. I think it's a very nice question about these migrating species in the context of climate change. But maybe just to think of one point, because when some species are moving, also remaining or maybe then coming in the same place when the others are moving. I can remember in the last time I flew it modeling context when they trying different species in the context of climate change to see where fishes are going, and then as a result they just say that 20% of the species already actually are migrating to other places, and the others are very resilient and then try to stay where things are changing. So this is, I mean, something very nice that, for example, modeling perspective can bring to us. And as already said about the model and then species richness, particularly for plankton. But I think for fisheries management, maybe one thing that what we can do, because many people say that for fisheries in the high seas we lack some data. We don't have how much fishes, for example, is actually catches, by who and where. And when people or one scientist, for example, Daniel Pauly, who is saying that the best things that we can do for conservation for fisheries management in the high seas is, for example, to end fishing in the high seas. Then we can create a kind of very large space of conservation for fishes, and notably for migratory fisheries. But the problem is, before the problem is, say, if you do that, then fish will rebuild in places where it is depleted now, or in places where fisheries is very low. So then it's a kind of rebuild to fishes in all EEZ, for example. But the problem is we lack some of data or some of science to know that. And some things that can maybe help us to answer these questions is, for example, doing modeling. In our team, for example, we are doing or developing modeling tools which take into account the plankton, from the plankton to the phytoplankton, zooplankton to the fisheries, and then also we are developing some kind of submodels which try to represent the dynamic of fleets, of different fleets from different ports, fishing and the effort and so on. And maybe this can help us to try different scenarios to see is effectively fishing are moving where they are supposed to move, and what is the impact of that, if that can maybe help us to rebuild fisheries in areas where there's depleted, or where or some areas where fishing is not very abundant. And then, this kind of tool, but I think can help us, and this a kind of fisheries regulation regulation that can be set in place?
Thank you, by what you just explained us and what you are doing. Your research is very important for modeling and for having more and for understanding better these issues. I had David and maybe David first.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Francois. I think this is an important point that we are dealing with dynamic ecosystems, and we do need to have adaptive management. We also need to have the monitoring that shows us the scale of change, and to, particularly in the case of climate change, to look for areas of resilience or areas that can be prioritized to be more resistant to climate change. But I just wanted to say that this is an important element too of the Sargasso project, because these are dynamic, both of them are dynamic ecosystems, and Pat Halpin and his team are looking at how you put in area-based management tools for areas of the ocean that shift in their importance. So the dome moves, and so does the floating mats of Sargasso move with seasons and with relative upwellings.
Thank you, David. Yes, Sargasso Sea is a good example of things that are moving. Yes, please.
Yes, you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have the official cast. I'm on YouTube, so it's at the same time, so I don't know. I'm sorry, David, I couldn't hear you. My name is Magali Rocamora-Solé. I'm from the Seychelles, but I worked before with the Tara Ocean Foundation, and I'm really happy to be here today and to see Lars and Bai presenting their work. And absolutely amazing work, so bravo for this. My question was more about the map maker, which is a super tool. And my question was, so if I understood correctly, it's the Marine and Polar Program of the IUCN who developed this tool? No. Can you? Yeah, okay. But my question was if there was a capacity building project linked to it. So it was really interesting. You could see what the plankton, etc., what was more, and the fact that there was a climate scenarios, I find it really interesting. And coming from a SIDS country, the Seychelles, having this tool is super important for us, but then the question is, how do we actually put in place measures for us to adapt? And a lot of data is scarce in the Seychelles, so we're really interested to know how you got the data of the map. And even if we have the data, the question is, do we have the means to do it? Do we have the cooperation to do it? Do we have the vessels to come and do the research? So that was my question. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Magali. Please, Aurélie.
Thank you very much for your interest and your question, Magali. So to clarify, so the MapMaker tool, it was developed by an early stage scientist that was funded thanks to this project, and that worked with the ETH in Zurich, so École Polytechnique Fédérale de Zurich. So they are in the team of Maike Vogt and Nicolas Gruber. So they are doing very impressive science on modeling. So they're working on models. So what you show, it's like the result of model future projections, and based on including observation. I mean, based on some information, but we have a lot of gaps in terms of marine, and you will confirm marine plankton diversity and knowledge and stuff. And I think it was a very short project, and we achieved this, so it was amazing. It was just 1 year, and we are now discussing with Tara Foundation to build the future of MapMaker and maybe join forces in a FFEM funded project to really, and I think the capacity building aspect of it will get at this stage. I mean, when we'll try to have still continue to improve MapMaker, and for that in the process, we engage with a stakeholder workshop, trying to have different person present them the tools, ask them also to respond to a survey to improve it. I mean, to get really feedback from the person that will use the tool afterwards. And all this, I mean, we will try to continue. I mean, with the Tara Foundation, and try to see how it can be integrated and into the future project funded by FFEM with the Tara Foundation on this topic. So, and yeah, the capacity building, I totally agree with you, but I think within this little framework we had no chance to go further than that, and it basically paid for one early stage scientist to develop the tool for 1 year, so it was like yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurélie, but we hope that this tool will be also provided to many people. The time is passing by very quickly. No, but we will not close now, but it's already almost noon, so I have Guillermo wanted to take the floor, and Denis, and all the panelists. 12:15. Okay, we still have. Okay. But please, Guillermo.
Thank you. I'll be very brief.
No, please go ahead.
I'm going to push back, Sir Francois, on a thing you said earlier about the notion of dynamic or non-static spatial management being new. I think the implementation is new. Heirenbach published a paper 21 years ago talking about dynamic spatial management of seascapes. So conceptually, it's not new. The implementation has been quite limited, and that's why we're here today, to try to see how we can go from theory to practice, right? And in the context of BBNJ, last year, we published a paper suggesting how the new treaty could incorporate the temporal dimension of area-based management tools, and we suggested 4 temporal scales that could be considered. The ocean is very dynamic at multiple temporal scales simultaneously, so it's a bit of a mess that we have to untangle. And we suggested a contemporaneous scale, weeks to months, an intra-annual scale that is predictable, looking at the seasons, an interannual scale that accounts for non-linear processes such as the Pacific Decadal Oscillation or the NAO, and then climate change, so a continuous multi-decadal sort of processes. So I think that has to be reflected somehow in our description of area-based management tools in the treaty, and I think that will facilitate implementation. But as of right now, like David said, we're thinking about a 4-dimensional system in 2 dimensions, and we really need to get the science translated to legal text over the next few years.
Thanks, absolutely. I fully agree with you. I think you scientists are very brave because the problem is huge. Yes, maybe Denis, Lars, please. No, that's fine. We just go around. Please, Lars, if you want to take the floor.
Okay, so thank you. I just wanted to bounce on the Seychelles case. Maybe there was no data in the Seychelles. It's a modeling, and what they do is that they associate species to conditions, and then they make this relationship, and they use it for future conditions. But what is important is that this model can learn from new observation to be better. And so if you come in the future with new observation, you can directly feed it into the model, and the prediction might be more accurate. And so in the Seychelles currently you have no sparse data. It's also the case in Senegal. And in Senegal, for example, with the FFEM, we are trying to build capacity development where we will train them at using tools to observe the ocean. And the idea that those observations, they feed directly into the mathematical model by was building, but also possible to use a niche modeling. So I think we are beginning with the niche modeling, and we are now, in the physical science, they are constraining the models in real time to predict the weather in 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. We are coming to that point, but it takes more time. Biology is more complex.
Thank you, Lars. Ba, you want to add something?
Yes, maybe you just want to say about data and collecting data in the high seas, because when we talk about high seas, it's not directly connected to the coastal, and many developing countries, they focus on coastal activities like fisheries. It is just a question of it about Sarah and also maybe other organizations. Is there like a kind of a plan to when they are monitoring some sites in the high seas to embed some people from the developing countries, because then they can be aware about the importance of the high seas and to look further to it and to connect with their local realities.
Yes, this is quite important for developing countries, you're right. Just Denis, please.
Yeah, just make a few comments. The feeling I'm representing the missing elephants in the room. There's not much of social science, economic data about all you want to change the world, you want to govern the world, and how are you going to do that without any economic, social, political data and fundamental research? So that was one of the key components to build the Sargasso project, which in fact have 3 components. A big one is on capacity building. Somebody has mentioned the importance of capacity building around, based on what we will do in the 2 case studies. Use that case study to demonstrate and train people of what is important, what we are doing. And the second one is about the governance, is about the 2 sides working at negotiating with all these international organizations that exist. Because even if David Freestone tried express the fact that the area of the Sargasso Sea is a kind of a black hole for governance, it is not really. Because then he has a list of 20 organizations he has to discuss with. So it's not a complete black hole. What it needs is structure, it's organization. So that's the second one. And the third one that we want to do is that, okay, you have a lot of data. What we need now, and you've shown it, we need data service to avoid data cemeteries. We have a lot of data cemeteries, dead data. So we need live data and we need data service. But that's not with that you will convince government to act or industry to change. You need to tell the story. The storytelling that you have to build needs to relate what you see as issues in the environment. Should it be the need to protect an endangered species, the need to be dynamic, to work with change? You have to link that with what does it mean in terms of the need for innovative governance. And in Sargasso we talk and we want to develop the concept of hybrid governance. You need to understand what it means for the fisheries in terms of economy. You have big businesses there. You cannot just say, go out of the high seas without understanding and informing what it means for them. If you want to go to the table and discuss, you need, in economy, in policy, you need data, you need evidence. And I know that your data you're collecting are very expensive, but try to get economic data from a big international business and you'll see how much it's difficult. And this has really to be then put to the table. That's why the next component, the last component of the project is the integration of information in a way that is informative to policy, that really says, what are the priorities? What do we know about what we can do about the priorities? Is it feasible, is it not, and why it is not, and where it has been to be discussed? So this is all about the Sargasso project. And I would just respond to Ernesto. Your bloody anchovies, they do their jobs. They look for their food. The problem is our fishermen, the Spanish fishermen, the French fishermen, who depend on the anchovies. That's the problem. Anchovies in Europe have no problem. They could try to escape to the high seas. And if they could, I don't know, biologically, they would be crazy to do that because there is no governance there. The only condition that relies for their governance is the fact that in Europe, we have an area-based management of fisheries that covers all the surface of the European EEZ. And what we needed to extend that to have a governance that is effective in the high seas, so that wherever the anchovies goes, they are well managed. The problem we have to deal with is what we do. We have a fisherman who have lost their job, and how we accompany the adaptation so that we don't have a crisis. And this is a socio-economic problem that we should address.
Thanks, Danny. Very, very clear and very interesting. Any reaction to this, Ernesto, or well, nothing more to say. Okay, thanks.
Maybe 2 words.
Lars, please.
Yes. If the anchovy goes away, they will be replaced by another species. So change the net.
Also. Aurélie, you want to?
Yeah, no, I think it's all very interesting, and I wanted to react also about to come back to the dynamic feature of the protection. But I think that the point that Bai just made, that okay, you have the dynamic and you move with climate change your protection areas, but then the impact will move as well. I mean, I think that's a very important point that we have to consider. And I don't know if about what you said, Denis. I don't know if some of you were here yesterday. I don't remember at what time, but with a presentation from David Obura. on the coral reef, and he had a very good drawings with two people. It was a family. It started with a family. One of them was a fisherman fishing on the reef and depending on the health of the reef, and the other one was his wife selling the fish and etc. And then he built, I mean, everything that was depending around this family and all about the health of the reef. And I think we should try to build this kind of stories, but for the high seas. It's a bit more complicated because it's far away and it's difficult of access, it's out of sight, but it's a bit less out of sight than 20 years ago, right? So we should and count on the Global Fishing Watch and this kind of tool that show what is happening in the high seas and probably in real time or something like that. But then we, IUCN and others, have a responsibility to communicate about that, to communicate, to tell the stories, to reach to the people. And we tried for Mampaker, for the plankton, because it's so important. It's the basis of the food life, any food in the all life in the ocean and beyond. And also for the importance of the carbon sinking and for the role of regulating the climate that plankton is providing to us. So, and we try to develop multimedia story where you see we explain the story of why it's important and why we are doing this, developing a tool, etc. So it's online or will be online very shortly. We didn't want to announce it before World Conservation Congress because we had so many emails that it would have been lost. But I think this is also a very important role of IGOs, NGOs, and institutions and university like yours. I mean, to communicate about the importance of the high seas.
Thank you, Aurélie. I think we are coming to the end of this session. It was a brilliant session. I found it very, very interesting, and of course there is so many other things we could have discussed. I think Guillermo mentioned and David, maybe you want to say something? You want to, before we close? David?
No, thank you to all the presenters. I think they did a fantastic job, and the panelists as well. It's been a great session. Thank you, Francois.
Thank you, David. So yes, I was saying that another point that we did not discuss at all, but was just pointed out by Guillermo, and I'm sure that Kim also is very interested by that, is how the RFMOs will cope with this new landscape for them. But this may be another story. And okay, thank you very much for all your participation. I think it was a good session. It's time to have a break. It's noon.
Thank you, Francois, for great moderation. And thank you, Yannick and Fenia and the OFB. So maybe, Cyril, you want to say a last word? Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much. Merci, François. I'm Cyril Barnerias from the French Biodiversity Agency. I won't be very long because you already had a lot of very interesting things that were said today. Hello, David. So, yeah, we spoke about, you spoke about high seas, I think, which are very important because there are the links between us all around the globe. Surveillance, data, capacity building, link with other agreements, moving MPAs. I won't repeat everything you said. I was just very impressed by the way things are going. We are very happy to play a role, OFB, to contribute, to bring technical and scientific support to the ministries for international conventions and including international cooperation. So we are a partner of one of the projects that were presented, Sargasso, that was presented today with other partners, of course, Maviva, Sargasso Sea Secretariat, and UBO, Ocean University Initiative. I think projects this kind of projects are very important because they contribute to the preparation of the BBNJ agreement, as they will feed giving very practical example of how you can build a governance. Of course, they are aligned with the FFEM strategy on high seas, and I think also
I would just thank you once again for your interventions today. Thank you for your participation, and we look forward also to see how this project will help the implementation of the BBNJ Treaty, because that's the next step that we are all looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cyril, for these closing words. So I wish you all a good session, the Ground Congress this afternoon. Thank you for your attention.